start the recording.
All right.
Welcome, everyone, to Opening Your Doors, Recruitment, Screening, and Orientation in Distance and Blended Learning. This is the second of a three-part series of webinars exploring effective practice that's written about in the Ideal Distance and Blended Learning Handbook. This one is a report and sort of a synthesis of early research on learner success in distance learning in adult basic ed, which showed the importance of finding learners for whom distance was a good fit, and then dedicating resources to ensure that they have a thorough orientation. This is now also applied to blended learning. Some of the foundational research happened before blended learning was an important approach to educating adult basic ed students. It requires a slightly different lens for thinking about recruitment, screening, and orientation, but I'm hoping that within this webinar you can take the guidance that's given or provided from both foundational research and current research in order to apply them to whatever teaching approach you're working in. Note that there will be a third webinar coming up on, I believe, on the 19th. And again, welcome. This work comes from the Ideal Consortium. Ideal Consortium is a group of basically leaders from member states who work in adult basic education at the state level or provide some sort of professional development leadership across their states in the area of distance and blended learning. Ideal Consortium has been around since about 2004, first at the University of Michigan under the leadership of Jerry Johnston, and as of 4 years ago, transitioned to the EdTech Center at World Ed. All of the work that you're hearing about here touches on the work of Ideal Consortium states in some way. If you want more information about Ideal Consortium, feel free to just do a web search on it. It'll bring you to this page where you can read more about our work. Ideal Consortium currently has a number of member states. This is about how many states we have at any given time. You can see the current memberships are flagged in red, and the past members are flagged in sort of that buff-colored. State leaders from each state get together every year and share their effective practice and their challenges, and then those conversations then in turn impact state policy within each of the member states. If you have any questions about anything that comes up in today's webinar, I encourage you to email me at jen_vanek@worlded.org, or you can just click, again, you can find more information on the website. So this is what we're going to do today. First, I want a sense of who's here. Then I'm going to share some foundational research, share some important areas of implementation, ways you could actually structure your implementation of blended or distance learning to make sure that you're building a program that's based on this foundational research. And then I'm going to give you some examples from different states that are part of the Ideal Consortium. Okay, so first up, I would love to know who is here, and feel free to just chat your role here. Are you a teacher? Are you state adult basic ed staff? Are you a teacher educator? Are you a program administrator or technology specialist? I'd love to see your chat now, so if you click on that chat bubble, the blue bubble at the bottom of your doc, and open up your chat window, then your message will appear if you direct it to all participants. So we see Luann is here from Sabe PD Center. We've got a couple teachers, Nikki and Tamara, who's also a program administrator. Tamara, you do a lot of work. And then we have Allison as a program administrator. A few others. Zoe, love to know what your work is. John is a distance teacher. And Zoe and hopefully you'll figure out your chat and let us know what your role is. Okay, so it looks like we have a wide range of people here, but everybody's got a hand on distance learning in some way. So just want to point out that this webinar is based on the second of corresponding series of blog posts that you can find on our website. Mike is going to chat the link to this. And I encourage you, if you're intrigued or you want a more permanent sort of record of some of the issues covered here, to go to the website and check out the blog post. Okay, so on to the work of the day. As I mentioned, early research on distance and blended learning in adult ed in the U.S. first illustrated the importance of finding the right students and setting them up correctly if programs are to succeed in offering distance education. There are three key pieces of literature here that I draw into this assertion. You can see them on the middle of the slide here, Petty and Johnston, Ask of Johnson, Petty and Young, and Petty. Mike can chat those, and you can also find them in the blog post. Essentially, these were the foundational studies that resulted in the shape of distance learning in most adult-based education programs in the U.S. And they are also what basically shaped the guidance in that the National Reporting Service provides in their NRS guidelines document. And what it found is that persistence is in fact improved when programs do two things: when they identify the learners that are best situated to succeed in their program, and then when they provide a thorough orientation. So that doesn't mean you have to turn everybody away just because they're not a good fit in your program, but it does mean that you'll have better success if you're reaching students that you have the resources that you can support. That's essentially what that means. So this is the foundational research. This idea has been confirmed in much more recent research. Some very recently by the Tech Center at World Ed through our technology testing and adult and learning and employment grant. We field tested 7 learning technologies and educational technologies that are also applied in the workplace in about 10 different sites. And what we found is a confirmation of this idea that proper setup really does support persistence down the road. You can read about that in Sharma, Vanik, and Weber. Also wanted to note that the EdTech Center at World Ed hosts an adult literacy XPRIZE communities competition team called World Ed. We hold monthly webinars with our team members and have found in those webinars, again, that when the teachers who are integrating the use of the mobile apps afforded by the XPRIZE Communities Competition into their classrooms, that those students are the ones that can persist. So essentially, there needs to be proper face-to-face setup in order to really launch adult basic ed students to persistent use of online learning technologies. So that's this evidence-based approach for the work that is coming next. So this is a screenshot of the ideal distance education and blended learning handbook. I go into much more detail on the components of effective blended and distance learning in the handbook. I highlight them in the blog post, and I'm going to touch on them here too. But essentially, we're talking about 3 areas of implementation for distance and blended learning, starting at the very beginning with recruitment of learners. So you have to decide who, where, and how to find the learners for distance, the right learners for a distance learning program. Once you've gotten a pool of potential learners, you need to identify which you can successfully support, and then you need to orient them to make sure that they have the necessary information and skills to successfully engage in your programming. I'm going to take each of these in turn in this with the rest of the webinar, and then give you a chance to consider how you are integrating these different components of effective implementation in your own programming. So first off, you need to decide who, where, and how to find learners for your distance learning program. I would also add that this works for blended learning too. Basically, you need to consider how you're going to deliver your online learning. Is it strictly distance or is it blended? And then once you make that decision, what kind of resources do you have that you can make available to learners? So if you have a sense of some sort of licensed curriculum that you know you have a license to, or you have easy access to, or you know that you are very fluent with, then you need to think about the target learner of that curriculum and engage in recruitment efforts that will specifically target those learners. You might also, if you need to think a little bit beyond the box because you don't have one specific licensed curriculum that you're using, you might think about the learners that are maybe in a particular classroom of a teacher who's really tech savvy. And maybe that is a good way to recruit learners for blended learning. Essentially, after you've kind of decided what the characteristics and skills and proficiencies are of the kind of programming you want to deliver, then you need to start thinking about where you're going to find students. So if you're thinking about blended learning, you probably want to think about classroom recruitment or in-program recruitment and how you might do that. If you're recruiting from outside the community, you might be thinking about things like flyers in public places or notes on your website, notes in social media, or leveraging the partnerships that you might have with your other WIOA-funded partners, like workforce development agencies, both one-stop and community-based organizations. Essentially, your efforts and your channels for communication about your recruitment strategies need to align with the venue and the targeted audience. So if I'm trying to, let's say I'm trying to recruit more tech-savvy students to my program so that we can have more success in blended learning, then I'm going to want to use a digital and internet-based channel for communication because that's where more tech-savvy people are going to pick up on it. So what you see here in the screenshot is a Facebook page of an adult basic education program in St. Paul, Minnesota. And if you could actually find this on your own at Hub Center. And you'll see that on this Facebook page there's a lot of recruitment and there are updates about distance and blended learning opportunities at the Hub Center. There's even a link on this Facebook page to a form where if students are interested, they can actually register. They can fill out an initial inquiry form. So again, you're attracting tech-savvy students based on the channel that you've chosen. So just some considerations. Another interesting recruitment strategy that I just recently heard about, there's a distance learning coordinator in northwestern Michigan. In the adult basic education partners very tightly with the American Job Centers in Michigan because the adult basic ed is part of the Michigan Department of Labor. And so this teacher has set up distance and blended learning programs in the actual American Job Centers. And to get people there, she's actually collaborated with area fast food agencies to put those tray liners, those pieces of paper that come on trays in fast food restaurants. Well, she made one that was a recruitment tool to get people to go into those one-stops, or the American Job Centers, and ask about distance and blended learning options there. So if you're either trying to reach, adding a distance or enhancing a distance or blended learning program is a really great way to bring in a new audience of learners, people you haven't been able to serve before for a multitude of reasons. And so that also kind of requires you to think a little bit outside the box about how you're going to do that recruitment. Again, check the handbook. If you want more examples, there are lots in there. Okay, so after you've recruited, you need to determine who's actually ready and who might need some support and scaffolding along the way. So you can have learners respond to your marketing and your outreach who can't yet succeed given the resources you have available. So you need to decide the threshold of skill level at which you can provide support. So it's really easy to say yes to everybody, but sometimes, and this is borne out in years of implementation across IDEO member consortium states, if you just say yes to everybody, even though you don't have the skills to really support them or the resources to really support them, it turns into a churn where you spend tons of time orienting new people who don't really have much chance of success. So what does adequate support available mean? In 2008, Heidi Silver-Piquia and Steve Reeder published a paper that's a meta-analysis. It's like a big lit review of past literature on trying to understand the skills required to succeed in online learning. And Mike can chat the link if you want to. Essentially, what they found is that anyone can succeed online if you have equitable distribution amongst these three components that you see in the Venn diagram. So you have to consider the learner's skills and the demands and the tech demands of the task at hand. You might even think about, beyond tech demands, also the academic content, the demands of the academic content. And then you have to consider the amount of support that's available. You need to be able to align these three things so that if learner skills fall short and tech demands are high, you have a lot of support available. But if you know you don't have a lot of support available, you need to look for learners and invite learners in who have higher skills or maybe use less demanding technology or less, or maybe experiment with blended learning with less demanding academic content. The idea is that not everything can be new. It can't be really hard new academic content, a really challenging and sophisticated new technology if you have learners with low skills and you know you just don't have enough support for them. So considerations here. What is the alignment of the learner's past knowledge with your proposed curriculum? Where there is good alignment, then you just need to worry about tech skills maybe. You could also do an assessment of non-academic competencies to see if they have really good soft skills or the habits of mind to support independent, goal-driven work. You could also think about a way to assess their problem-solving skills. Is it likely that a learner is going to be totally stopped and fail to persist because they experience one issue logging in, or can they problem solve through it? There are a few exams or there are a few quizzes where you can get a sense of a student's aptitude for online learning. I'm not sure we're prepared to chat the links to these. Actually, they're in the blog. So please do check out the blog post to get links. There are two. There's one from Penn State, and there's one from the Minnesota State College and University System that you can actually use as either examples for creating your own aptitude assessment, or you could actually just use those. The final areas that you need to consider are whether or not students have adequate tech skills and computer and internet access. The North Star Digital Literacy Assessment is an excellent resource that I think you're all, I'm just going to chat the link. I think you're all familiar with this because I believe it's in use in Massachusetts. It's a baseline assessment of foundational computer skills. You could maybe give them one or two, like the Internet Search Test or the Computer Basics Test, just to see where they are. You could use it as a way to flag where you might need to provide some scaffolding for learners who fall just a bit short. The other thing that's really important here is if you know you can provide absolutely no guidance or support for internet access, it's really, really hard to expect your learners to persist. So there are a lot of different options. You could find out what their access is and then guide them to maybe a community-based organization or a library or American Job Center that you partner with, where they could go and they could work on their online work. You could make sure that you use a content that is easily accessed through a mobile device. If you work at a program that has a computer lab, you could consider opening up your computer lab for students to work on their distance learning work. So there are several responses to access issues. A really interesting program happens in Rhode Island. The Providence Public Library actually has these literacy lounges where students can come in and work on anything. And for students who don't have access at home, they even lend tablets and hotspots. I've heard of a number of programs that are doing a lending library like that. Again, the Hub Center in St. Paul Adult Basic Ed did the same thing with Chromebooks and hotspots. And in both cases, there was really no issue with misplacement or there was very little breakage. The program was a success in that the technology came back to the program and it was well used by students to progress in their learning. All right, so the following area that we need to that I want to share with you is around orientation. So some of the first research on the impact of orientation was done by Porter and Strum. This is like in 2006. Again, the link is in the blog post. They found that learner persistence in distance ed programs was connected to the quality of the orientation received prior to the instruction. And that an important part of successful orientation was trying to balance building a relationship with the instructor. So it was the actual face-to-face time and the rapport building that happened at the beginning that was really important to learner persistence. So a carefully planned orientation can provide time to build rapport, but also time to address a wide range of issues that might come up as learners engage with the online part of blended learning or in distance learning. So issues are like, does the learner have a good place to study and know how often to study? What are their goals for distance learning? How do they access and navigate the device the device that they might be using? How do they access or navigate through the learning curriculum and learning resources that you want them to access? These are all very important things to cover in a distance learning program. What you see here is a screenshot of some work shared by Diana Satin. There in Massachusetts, she has set up a Weebly site that has some information that you could use in support of your distance learners, particularly the Handbook for Distance Learning that you see down at the bottom of this list. So this could be something, the Handbook is something that you could use as the basis of orientation. Other examples of successful components of orientation can be found in the blog post. There's a really great infographic that I neglected to get into these slides, but basically it reiterates the point that a successful distance learning program addresses setting goals and expectations, technology requirements and access, training to use the actual curriculum, and figuring out how, learner success strategies around study time, goal setting, check-ins, like how often do you promise as a teacher to check their work and actually communicate with the learner. All of that stuff needs to be articulated during the orientation. So do check out the blog post. I have a few more examples here of things that I've seen work really well in orientation. The screenshot on the left is a PowerPoint presentation that was put together by a couple teachers in southern Minnesota. They made a PowerPoint so that they had sort of like a rotating crew of teachers who would sit in a distance learning office in their program, and they wanted to make sure that everybody was communicating the same components and the same message in their orientation. So they created this PowerPoint that they occasionally showed to large group orientations, but it was available so that every teacher who is onboarding a student into distance learning or blended learning would be able to cover the same information. So it's media rich. It's got some video. It's got lots of photos, and it's been a very successful tool for them. The thing that you see on the right is an actual plan. It's a document that that I've seen used, variations of this I've seen used across the U.S., where, and some are actually framed as like a contract, where the learner acknowledges their goals, identifies where and when they're going to study, and then also confirms that they understand their responsibilities, that including the amount of time that they'll put in and when they're going to check in. And very importantly, that they agree that by participating in the distance learning program that they are agreeing to post-test with the distance learning teacher at the end of whatever time frame is required in the state. Also important to note that you can use orientation to make sure that teachers understand their own expectations or the expectations for themselves, and that learners are also know what they can expect from their teacher. Note at the bottom of this screenshot that this particular place, this is Hub Center, has drop-in hours, so they too have it's a whole, it's a week-long calendar of, or week-long, it's a scheduled drop-in time that happens every day. There's like Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, and then Friday at different times, where there's somebody in what's called the distance learning office. And the fact that there's always somebody there means that they can be using the time, if they aren't meeting with students who are dropping in, to make phone calls and support persistence of learners who haven't come in for a little while, maybe check up on learners that they're collaborating with really closely, and then, of course, just respond to people who come in with inquiries about distance learning. Or remember I said the Hub Center has that form connected to their Facebook page. The teachers also use that time to look to see who's completed that form and to reach out and engage new learners coming into the program. So you can do a lot with a decent orientation. I have yet to see a decent orientation that is fewer than like 3 hours. It takes a chunk of time. That's why most programs schedule them with regularity and have learners sign up and make a reservation for a spot. There can be a lot to cover, especially if you're doing a digital literacy assessment, an online studying aptitude assessment, demonstrating how to use a portal or an online curriculum, and also completing a distance learning plan or a contract. There can be an awful lot to cover. So, programs handle this differently. There's a program in DC that I'm working with right now that spreads the orientation out across the whole week. So they're doing this with blended learning, and they have students coming in anyway. So they have just taken an hour at the beginning of each day that they know the students are going to be there, and they spread these orientation activities out across a week over a 5-day week. So that's a 5-hour orientation. Again, there's more information on orientation if you go to either the blog post or the full manual. So we are now at the time in the webinar where you get to ask me some questions. Oh, and Luann has one. Let me answer this question, and then I'm going to give you an actual thought activity. Luann asked if I have a sense of how programs with limited English prof learners handle orientation. Oh, proficiency, yeah, thanks. In person is best if you have English language learners. If you have a bilingual teacher, that makes it much easier, but it is not necessary. I know of programs that work with the lowest level ELLs using USA Learns, and they don't speak the language of the student, yet they manage to get the learners at least involved in understanding how to navigate the tool. So obviously things like a contract with complicated language in it is not going to be easy for the lowest level learners. You might consider getting a contract translated into another language so that learners don't miss out on any information. Or you could create simple materials that have like a calendar and a clock and, use icons to reinforce the text that is on the form. Okay, so this is your little thought activity. I've just gone over, and these are out of order, sorry, recruitment, screening, and orientation. I'd like you to take a minute and think about what you're doing in each of these areas. And then you're going to have a chance to talk about the work that you're doing or ask questions about how you might address a particular concern in any of these categories of implementation. So I'm literally going to give you 5 minutes to take out a piece of paper and a pencil or pen, and make a chart like this and take some notes to see and to record what you're doing in each of these areas. You can also record questions about particular concerns. So maybe we can pause the recording, and we will check back with you at 9:40 Central, 10:40 Eastern about your efforts in these areas. So just take a minute to finish up your thinking, and then we'll open it up to discussion. Okay, I see another comment in the chat. There have been a couple comments in the chat from Zoe and Zoe. I'm sorry, Zoe. Would you like to actually talk to the group, about what you chatted? It looks like you're connected by phone, so Mike can unmute you.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Hello?
Welcome. Thanks for sharing some ideas.
Sure.
Please tell us more about what you chatted.
Sure. So when we screen the students, we do it all online to try to make sure that they're responsive with email and can, follow through on an email. So that's like one screening tool. The first email we send out just general information on the program, and then if they respond back that they're interested, then we dig in and have them answer some questions on, tell us about your work area, where will you study, do you have access to a computer with a reliable internet connection, and then, some other questions too. And then the third email, I have them do an actual time management plan where I send them like an actual calendar and an example, and I make them write down exactly when their 5 hours will be so they can, it's like a reality check if they're very busy with personal and work commitments. When are they actually going to, because it all sounds great to them online, but the reality of planning that time can be very, poignant for them.
Yeah, those are great strategies. I want to just throw something out there as for a reaction from the group. One of the things that we're learning through our investigation of use of mobile apps for learning is that learners who don't have large blocks of time love them because they have a device in their hand that they can use anywhere, anytime, like 20 minutes on the bus, 20 minutes, on the sidelines of your kid's soccer game, a 15-minute break at work. And so I'm wondering what the reaction to this is like a brand new way of thinking about it. Like I agree, like all of the past research that I've seen and engaged with shows that this planning and setting up time is really important. But now we have this like new technology that might be changing the way we're thinking. And I'm just wondering if anybody else has noticed that learners you're noticing persistence with a solid orientation to an app that's more of a just-in-time kind of thing. Or though, if you want to comment on that too, feel free to. So maybe nobody's using apps, which is, go ahead. I thought I heard somebody try to break in.
Yeah, that was me. I had a couple of students who were able to do a lot of USA Learns, not so much through their apps, but just using, logging into the program on their phone and utilizing downtime they had at work or, spare time that they could squeeze in. The biggest thing that I have found is that students will make the time management plan, but then they find that real life interrupts them more often than not, and they end up scrambling. So I think using the phone is, to my mind, not ideal, but may be the way it has to be done.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way to frame that, John. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I would love to hear what others are doing in terms of recruitment, screening, and orientation. Okay, people, maybe you're not feeling like you've yet to begin in this kind of work. I mean, I hope then, if that's the case. Oh, somebody's trying to break in. Go ahead.
I think it's me. Jen, can you hear me? It's Luann.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that, we're updating our guidelines in Massachusetts, and things are shifting here. Anyone who is on the webinar from Massachusetts understands what that means. But one of the things that we're thinking about is to think more broadly about recruitment in terms of, not just thinking about how will I recruit my distance learning students, but sort of how do I recruit all of my students, and then out of that pool, how do I determine whether a subset of them might benefit from and be appropriate for distance learning, and sort of offering it as a flexible series of options for students. And so the recruitment that you would do for people who are going to be solely enrolled in distance learning is a little bit different, because you're trying to reach other audiences besides the ones who would come to your face-to-face class. But we also are really promoting this idea of hybrid or blended learning, where students come to your face-to-face classes, but then there's this added opportunity for them to engage in distance learning. So we're trying to come up with some suggestions and some scenarios where people will think really broadly when they're thinking about recruiting students for their program, some of which will be solely distance learning, some of which will be face-to-face, and some of which will be both, and then how to triage everyone who comes in the door to see which is the best fit. So we're thinking holistically about our services, and then differentiatedly, if that's a word, or in differentiated terms about the students. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really great idea. And that's an approach I've seen work in other places. I'm thinking of one program. I don't want to give away a lot of information about the location, but they were having a terrible time recruiting anyone but refugees and immigrants. The site became known. It was an adult basic education site, but it became known in the local community as the place where the refugees go. And so there are a lot of native-born who didn't want to go there, because it's not like they were anti-refugee. They just didn't see that as a place for them. So the program changed their program recruitment strategies to feature distance learning, to show that there were multiple ways of learning and be supported by teachers at the program, and that the teachers had a wide range of skill with, ASD or high school or HSC, and of course English language learning and career pathways. So I think that's really wise, Luann. I think you'll end up attracting learners who wouldn't have thought about the programs otherwise. Any other questions or comments, reactions? Okay, so I will just remind you that the next and final series, a third webinar in the series of 3 is happening on June 19th. 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern. And this will be on assessment and instruction and distance and blended learning. So those chapters of the handbook that describe these implementation areas, and then also the third blog post that I wrote on the handbook topics. Thank you very much for being here today. If you are not from Massachusetts, Massachusetts is an Ideal Consortium member. If you're on the call but you're not from Massachusetts, know that we would love to grow our program, because the more participation we have from across the country, the more examples we have, the more research we're able to do, and the more we're able to learn and share about what makes for good distance and blended learning. So check out the website and do email me if you have questions about any of this. I'm going to chat my email address. And it's been a pleasure being online with you. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you. Bye.